Today we officially crossed the 100,000 subscriber mark. Thank you guys all for the love and support. I couldn't have done it without you guys. Now, let's get to the video. The back is one of the more complicated muscle groups to train. For full development, we need to focus on the width of the back, which is mostly a result of wide lats. We need to focus on the thickness of the back, which is mostly a result of the upper back musculature, the rhomboids, the lower traps, the middle back, and even the rear delts. Now, to tie everything in, we need to focus on the entire posterior chain as a whole, from the muscles that run all the way down from the upper traps down to the lower back and spinal erectors. If you do at least one exercise for each of these three categories, you're pretty much covering 90% of your back training. And the other 10%, it's made up of much more detail-specific or more refining movements. But we'll get to those later. The key is just picking the right exercise for these categories, picking the right movements and performing them correctly. For the first lat-specific exercise or back width movement, we're gonna go with a vertical pulling exercise. Now, for the stronger guys or those of you who don't have excess body weight, the basic pull-up is gonna be king. Wide grip, underhand grip, neutral grip, they're all excellent options. I'm partial to the wide grip, and it allows me to pull all the way until my clavicle hits the bar. This allows me to fully squeeze the lats at the top of the movement. It also helps me get much more mind-muscle connection out of this exercise. Now, that exact same technique, it can be applied on a lat pull down, but personally, I like to use an underhand grip on a pull down, as this allows me to lean back slightly and pull much lower to my sternum. This allows me to train the lats with a slightly different grip and range of motion than what I use on the pull-ups. And this allows me to round out my training, prevent overuse injuries, and it also helps make sure that you're covering your back from all angles. Now, the next best exercise to make the list is going to be a horizontal row, or a back thickness movement. That would be the basic barbell row. And alternatively, it could be a T-bar row, as that also hits the back in a very similar way. But there's just something about the straight bar that's much more humbling. It's easier to set up. You don't need any attachments or any fancy equipment. All you need is a bar and some plates. You can do them bent over at a 90-degree angle to work to stabilize your muscles a bit more. You can perform a dead stop at the bottom, or you can get a full stretch. There's pros and cons to each variation, and I use all of them. And if you don't have any limitations or injuries, you should use at least one variation in your training. Now, to finish off back with the third movement, and one that works the entire posterior chain, one that hits those traps, middle and lower back, we have the hip hinge movement. That can be a deadlift, stiff leg deadlift, RDL, or even a trap bar deadlift. Most of you who follow me know I'm not a huge fan of conventional deadlifting for bodybuilding training. And in the case of picking the best exercise, I'm going with the RDL for sure. Now, before the comments blow up, Pete, Romanian deadlift is a hamstring exercise. RDLs and any hip hinge movement are compound exercises. Of course, they work the hamstrings, even the glutes. And in many cases, I even program them on lower body days. But have you ever seen the backs of some of the strongest deadlifters in the world? Try holding 300 to 400 pounds for a set of 10 on RDLs, taking the entire posterior chain through a loaded stretch with a full range of motion. And tell me that everything from your upper back, your traps, all the way down to your lower back, your hamstrings and your glutes is not completely fried. Regardless of where you program them in your training, your back is getting hit extremely hard with them. And I'd argue that anyone with a physique that lacks thickness or density is probably skipping out on hip hinges. But is that it? Do you only need these three exercises? If you're training to get as big as possible, those are your three main lifts. If you need to develop the finer details of your physique, you're probably going to need to hit some bent over lateral raises or face pulls for the rear delts. You're going to want to develop the intercostal muscles in the front of your physique, hitting the serratus muscles with movements like the pullover. But those are all refining movements that you should use after you hit those basic exercises. Now, today, many people have overcomplicated the game, and they try to sell you with elaborate exercises with different angles, hand grips, techniques, and in my opinion, these are just ineffective exercises. And I personally believe these are the worst movements in the gym that you can be doing. Why? Did you ever notice that these fancy movements are easier to perform than the ones that I mentioned? As I always say, people are not missing out on results because they're not performing the most latest and greatest movements. People are missing out on results because they haven't applied the effort to the tried and true exercises. The greatest physiques of all time, they were built on pull-ups, pull-downs, rows, and deadlifts. Just look at Arnold, look at Ronnie, look at Dorian Yates. They all did barbell rows, they all deadlifted, Not one of them used fancy equipment. Sure, genetic freaks, they used PEDs, and they had some of the best work ethics in the world. But if they thought that they could get better results with fancy exercises, wouldn't they use them? Why didn't they? Because the basics worked, and they knew that. They worked very well, and they work just as well now as they did back then. If you want to build muscle, and you want to do so using proven old school bodybuilding training methods, make sure to check out my old school mass gain programs down below. And as always, if you guys want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.